We can't have more legislation. We can't.
I think we need distillation. That's the key.
I think, to be honest with you, there's a bit of a grey area at the moment, and ESG probably has and is quite focused on the technical elements rather than actually it's got a much broader facet in the work we're doing, maybe at a technical level.
So the question is this all relevant, and isn't it stopping the economy now? So how do we build sustainable buildings and stop it? And I don't see any particular answers.
Let's all say goodbye to the property industry. It'll just be like people. There's other things people can do with their money.
I'm Andy Cox, director and co-founder of Trigon.
Andy, thank you so much for coming in. You obviously run a development management business now. How did you end up doing that?
I think back at the start, real estate's never been really in my life when I was young. Probably found my way accidentally through a friend's father who at a karaoke evening after a few drinks offered me a job. And that manifested itself in pursuing a career as an engineer. So I trained as an engineer with John Sisk, stayed there for about 12 years, worked my way up through. And they were a fantastic people-based business, invested a lot in training and bringing people through. And that gave me a real passion for real estate, but in particular around the people in real estate and how it goes together. And working on a site with 100 different nationalities and mindsets and different goals everyone had was what really got me excited. So having worked through with Sisk, I spent some time at Queensbury Real Estate, who are a development manager, working across a broad range of assets, quite regeneration focused, which again was more the softer side of it that really interested me and probably got the most satisfaction out of on delivering value and seeing change and improving those environments. And then I spent some time with BMore, sort of our sister company, who are a private equity developer. We had a holiday park business that we developed out, and that was quite an insight into the funding and intricate worlds of an operating business, which has helped us going forward.
So was that you were actually working for the developer themselves? Yeah,
that's right. Yeah, so we were the developer. We were backed by Angela Gordon and partnering with T&B Capital. And we bought holiday parks, and the whole strategy was to get planning, develop them out, and grow that operating business, which eventually got sold.
And then you obviously jumped in and launched your own business. Was that, talk me through that decision? And also, it seems like you've stayed in reasonably close relationship with the company that you sort of left to start up a business. Was that always the plan?
Yeah, I think so. So James and I had always wanted to do something together. I've worked with James, my business partner. He was my first boss as senior engineer on one of my projects. So, and we really have harboured a bit of frustration in the industry for a while on two fronts. One, people pushing projects straight through a straight process that has no flexibility and is just rolled out project and has been for 10 years. So, we have a real focus on understanding the requirements of a project and a client, which are different every time, and building a strategy around that. And I think just secondly, sort of one of our drivers set the business up was we like to be involved in the whole process. We have a real focus on the front end, getting the front end of a project right, understanding the inputs, and not just been handed a ball of risk that someone else has put together and asked to unravel it and deliver it.
And on a day-to-day, what is it you actually do? What is it, DM?
So we have two work streams in the business. We do development management for clients and separately we do project management for clients. But in both roles, sort of the principles stay the same. We sort of have three guiding principles, one being transparency. So, we truly believe in honesty and open book approach with clients and teams. And what we find that harbours is everyone has a common goal across the team. We all understand where we're trying to get to and minimises change. We have a focus on the proficiency piece, and obviously we're working with you guys on the sort of ESG, sustainability taxonomy front, but really understanding how something goes together, both physically, practically, design-wise, and from a legislative point of view. So all our guys are from a technical background, and that's something that we take as a real core value. And the third one is sort of adaptability that we bring into all our projects, and being able to understand the specific requirements, stay ahead of what's going on in the world with change, and making sure we adapt to that. And I suppose that manifests itself into the projects day to day, in really focusing on true risk management against the deliverables of the project. So whether we're sitting in a development management role and slightly more involved in perhaps the value side of a project, the acquisition and the strategy, or if we're in the PM seat and the nuts and bolts of working with the team, pulling it together and driving it forward. It's really understanding at an integrate level the technical side of the risks, because if we can relate to the teams and the teams can relate to each other, understand each other's stresses, then ultimately we can drive a better outcome.
So ESG, who really cares? What is it?
It's a very good question, and you know, working with you guys, as you know, we've all been out talking to different parties in the industry, and what someone actually said to me, well, is it ESG or is it sustainability? Because sustainability in itself, maybe it's seen as a technical element of ESG, but actually there's governance in there because you need a process to deliver it and control it, and there's social value in there because you're delivering a sustainable product, and that naturally brings social value. So I think, to be honest with you, there's a bit of a grey area at the moment, and ESG probably has and is quite focused on the technical elements rather than actually it's got a much broader facet in the work we're doing, maybe at a technical level.
In as much as it relates to a project, a specific project, what is the advantage if you are a commercial developer in ensuring that you are hitting the current taxonomies for ESG?
So I think, and we have to accept, and the industry has to accept, and it will be the norm going forward, that driving sustainable ESG value goes hand in hand with driving commercial value. Otherwise, it won't happen. So I mean, at a high level, the benefits of delivering on ESG or sustainable targets, we feel, is resilience of an asset, and that resilience is not necessarily taking a few basis points off the value, whatever it is. No one can say at the moment that value is different. But it's the resilience of that asset going forward in holding its value, in its operational cost, in its positioning in the market, and ultimately what it's delivering from a sustainability point of view from the end user. So it's more about establishing that resilience and setting a benchmark and a level that will continue through.
So I was with some investors and they said, it's all very well and good, this ESG thing, but it doesn't create money. It's a defensive position. It's defending against the future devaluation of your asset. Would you agree with that?
I think in the current market, it's a fair assessment. And we're probably seeing that on a slightly smaller scale with the MEES regulation coming in, and what's happening in the office market and people having to raise the performance of their buildings at a slightly granular, smaller level. But the value really is that investment now to create that long-term protection. So it probably is a fair statement.
So, Andy, what is this? What is MEES for the audience?
So MEES spreads across residential and commercial office properties, are standards that have been brought in and are gradually ratcheting up towards 2030, setting minimum EPC levels for an asset for you to let a tenancy agreement or lease your building, essentially.
So I guess for any landlords or developers that are kind of aware of this in the background, but what's the result if they don't get their EPC? Or
Well, ultimately, you're forbidden from letting that building in our sense. So, there's offshoots of stranded assets, and that's something that, particularly over the last year, has started to become quite a buzzword in the market, and we're seeing people gravitate towards that. And I think, collectively, we've seen quite a strong reaction with retrofitting moving up the agenda. We had a session ourselves with Trigon from the city, and their focus on making sure they're ahead of that and bringing buildings of a decent standard from a sustainability point of view back into the market before they become stranded across the industry.
Yeah, I mean, I guess we're on a day where the economy has announced that it's a growth by, 0.1%. So I don't know, do we think this kind of stuff's going to carry on, or are they going to throw it in the bin to get more economic growth?
The problem that you potentially have is that whilst it theoretically might drive economic activity, it also might create a massive default in the market, because all of these assets that people think pension funds own and are worth £300 million in a portfolio are suddenly worth £2 million, and you might have a completely explosive impact.
Loss, yeah.
On assets that people haven't considered and are on people's balance sheets, I would imagine.
Yeah, and I think holistically in the industry and socially, there's such a huge quantum of change over the last 5 years, particularly now from an economic point of view, from a legislative point of view, from social habits point of view. COVID's been a catalyst of that. And I was chatting to someone this morning about, or we were chatting as well about some of the GLA guidance. And if you plotted all these changes and all these sometimes reactive, sometimes proactive measures on a timeline and saw what the economy did as it went along, it would probably tell quite a story. But I think ultimately, it is about harbouring where the economy is at this point in time, and finding deliverables against these sustainability strategies to comply with these legislations. And, delivering a sustainable building, we've got to change the mindset. It needs to be the norm and not, setting a benchmark and sort of best in class. There's, in Italy, if you get a driving license, you start with 20 points. And if you get caught speeding or do something wrong, you lose points. So there's a loss aversion thing. And they've proved that loss aversion drives better performance. You'd rather not lose something than
it doesn't remind me the last time I went driving in Italy. It was mental.
Also, that implies that, in England, we're collecting points.
Well, you do get. Whilst it's annoying when you get a ticket,
I've got a great collection.
Yeah, you get a little bit of a buzz. But unpacking now, I was with an industry peer before Christmas, who works in the commercial office world, and he was saying he'd been at one of the events we've all been at in the basement of the Grove, an awards event, and all these schemes were flashing up with sustainability and accreditations, and he was sitting there thinking to himself, well, surely this should be the norm. This should be the benchmark that's woven into everything we do, and taking that step further, using technology as an innovator. That really is exemplar and taking it further. But delivering buildings that are resilient, deliver on defined principles, which we've got some work to do on, should really be woven into everything we do day to day.
Is it that architects find ESG a bit boring, and that's why? Because everybody, if you read every architect's website, it says, whatever, we are exemplar in sustainability. So it's like, oh great, we're all there. We all have the same knowledge. We're all experts at this sustainability thing. There's literally nobody that says that they're not. But yet the buildings that are being produced aren't really, particularly in the residential market, particularly sustainable. They're just bog standard. Why is it that people aren't embracing this ESG thing and going, oh wow, look, this asset's going to be more valuable for longer if you do these things?
I think there's a piece around having relatable outcomes, that it doesn't matter where we sit in our industry, outside our industry, you're an end user, or maybe you're just a passerby, but having outcomes that are relatable to what we are delivering on, and then sitting below that, having defined goals, but goals that give us all a bit of space to work with. In our industry, the technical expertise is absolutely unbelievable. We deliver some incredible buildings, infrastructure, and sort of the innovation and the thought process and the technical skills, is second to none. But we've sort of created ESG as a bolt-on, and a compliance piece that we have to do our day job, and we have to work through a design stage, and then we have to bounce it off this piece of compliance legislation to see if we get through it. And it coming out of the discussions we've been having collectively with some of the funders in the market, working together, there seems to be a struggle, if you like, of weaving in working towards those sustainable deliverable goals. In everything we do day to day, we do a bit of work and we assess it, and we do a bit of work and we assess it. So I think really, to answer your question, Ollie, to get it woven in, it's about having defined outcomes that apply across how many work streams, particularly you guys, have got in your head at any one time, be it planning, be it building regs, be it taxonomy, be it a market-facing badge, a neighbours that is being requested from an investor or developer. So,
well, I think this is something that comes up a lot on this podcast. Is there's just too much legislation, and it's contradictory to itself. And I think you must experience that. The two things that ChatGPT says that you are an expert at are the Building Safety Act and ESG. And I was like, what a CV! All the complicated things that nobody quite understands or particularly wants to deal with. Your head must be an interesting place.
I think, thank you, ChatGPT. But I think it sort of goes back to how we approach any project in any discipline or in any sort of part of a client's deliverables is at the front end, let's agree what we're trying to do from a deliverables point of view, and let's get the whole team bought into that and understand what we're working towards. And I think sometimes, as you describe, ESG can be something that just sits alongside that process, and we haven't fully sat down and understood how all the work streams go together to deliver on those. And if we can establish these goals and almost build, and I'll use your phraseology, John, a golden thread through through all of these facets.
I don't think John invented golden thread.
No.
He did in the ESG analogy. I remember it well over a pint, but it's about that definition of relatable and understanding why we're doing things. We all know why we do space standards when you're designing a house. You know why they're like that. Is to do the quality of living in the space. But understanding when we're delivering a sustainable product, what is it doing?
I think I think the thing that I was talking about, which did relate to the golden thread, which I can't claim credit for, but was about dots and threads. So what I feel is like we're machine gunned by loads of legislation. So every new government, every new initiative goes, oh shit, we didn't do this very well. Oh, whatever. And then, oh, let's put a new policy in to do it. And then the housing ministers have changed 16 times. So it's just this like cacophony of noise. You're in a machine gun with all these dots. Then you're trying to track a thread through that, which is, the idea in the BSA and everything else. But BSA in some ways is another thing. So the question is this all relevant? And isn't it stopping the economy now? So how do we build sustainable buildings and stop it? And I don't see any particular answers, because I see the government saying on one hand, they're putting their foot on the accelerator, build. But on the other hand, we're getting overloaded with regulation. And I wonder what your forecasts might be. Do you think we'll overcome that, or is it just going to stutter forward?
I think at the moment, if we look at the specific legal deliverables, if you like, there aren't actually that many that are fully mandated on what we need to do in our projects from a sustainability point of view. There are elements of carbon, but there isn't mandated carbon targets that get pushed into every project. You might see it localized to a borough, or you might see it, more regionally. But actually, I think that the risk at the moment is that what is enforceable actually does not deliver a huge amount on where we need to be from a sustainability point of view. So that's probably quite a small layer. And then when you come below that, which are probably more market driven or pressured, and that might come from the investment market, from a taxonomy point of view, or we're building a building for an end user that themselves have set carbon targets, that's adding another layer. And it's that layer where we have all this ambiguity, and you can't get it all in your head because it's too wide, and there isn't that single goal. So potentially you sieve some of it out and actually legislate some specific deliverables and requirements which are consistent in our projects, and we know where we're starting from. When someone's trying to buy a brownfield site, they know what they've got to do, regardless if they're going to put resi on it or sell it commercial office or bring a certain operator in.
We can't have more legislation. We can't.
I think we need distillation. That's the key. I think I hear because the answer is where's the forecast going? And when I hear all of that, I think, oh my God, it's going to be a big spaghetti junction mess of threads. And
well, it already is a spaghetti junction mess.
Yeah.
This idea that Angela Rayner would come in and go, planning reform, ta-da, magic wand. That's not the thing that's stopping the industry. It's lack of viability. And lack of viability is being driven by lack of certainty around Building Safety Act, lack of certainty around this stuff. Give people certainty.
But can I say something controversial? Although as an architect I support increasing standards and the London plan, etc. Just had lunch with a developer, and all the extra things that they have to do, be it dual aspect, everything else, means that the cost might be 10-20% higher, which means that 75% of the sites they're appraising just do not stack up.
Yeah.
So there's this
we're saying the same thing, aren't we?
Well, in a weird way, are we saying dereg?
Yes.
Yeah, deregulate is needed to actually achieve sustainability, because otherwise you end up with nothing.
Yeah.
You sort of end up with stagnation, which is possibly where we're at the moment. Then that's the kind of, the engine is stalling because you've got the accelerator on and the brake on. It's going, it's like, and that's what's kind of happening.
You're not going to get any points doing that.
And just on that, I agree with you, and I don't see deregulation as I don't see bringing a bit more clarity to regulation in a strange way could facilitate the deregulation, because I think a lot of the things that are in people's head about regulation potentially isn't imposed upon us. It's guidance or it's market pressure, whereas actually using the word distilled, and same as you're saying, Ollie, if we can bring that down and define it and make everyone understand it and let's all relate to it, we know where we're headed.
Well, exactly. Half the things that people are doing now are based on incoming legislation and their perception of what insurers might say. So if you had clearer guidance with clearer timescales and go, look, you don't need a second staircase until this year. You don't need it now. You still don't need it, right? On buildings over 18 metres now at this exact moment. But everyone's putting them in because they're like, well, whatever, I'm scared. And the insurers will say it. And it's like, well, if you don't need it, you don't need it. There needs to be clarity. rather than, as you say, people just assuming things. And then you could get rid of a lot of legislation if there was more certainty and clarity.
Yeah, I'd agree.
How are you finding the Building Safety Act? You've had some good experiences, bad experiences. Do you want to talk about them?
Yeah, quite happily. We've had a big focus on it from day one, really. And I think it's been an interesting journey, which is probably, unfortunately, going to slightly mirror itself in some of the learnings in what we're talking about today. But I mean, ultimately, what we found is that it is a big learning journey, and Judith Hackett talks about a change in mindset, and I don't think we fully appreciated, and maybe the wider industry, what that actually meant until we get into the nuts and bolts of it, until we start stress testing it and putting it into practice, and the shift of responsibility across the parties. Strangely, one thing with it is that as an industry, we like things to be absolutely defined, and that you will do this and you'll tick that box, and that is compliance. Whereas, the Act has fundamentally changed the definition of compliance. It's down to the specialism to confirm that they believe that is compliant, whether it's in line with the regs or we've moved away from regs under the guidance, and we're demonstrating that. So the mind shift thing, whilst we appreciated what was said at the outset, that's something has really grown over the last probably year and a half.
Could you give an example of that?
I think the main one for us, to be honest, is sort of the building regs PD or the BSA PD, which is still a role that the industry is getting to understand. And I think from the outset there was perception that role signed everything off and was ultimately the gateway for compliance, and off you went to the regulator and we've got the bit of paper that says it's compliant, so this should just be a theoretical exercise, when actually when you try and interpret the Act and understand it and put it into practice, that actually is a guiding role. It's not an approval role. The approval role sits with the regulator, and everyone in that process has a responsibility to be comfortable and state that their element of that project is compliant. So that's been a big mindset change.
And have you got any through Gateway 2 yet?
Not yet.
Close?
We're in the process. We've got one submitted at the moment.
How have you found the engagement with them once it's submitted?
Limited, if I'm honest. I think we've had a very good experience pre-submission on engagement, which we proactively went and sought engagement. It was more, the guidance is more around how your approach might look, rather than, again, we like people to tell us do this, don't do that, and that's not what you get from the regulator, and that's not what the Act has set out to do. There's obviously a bottleneck. There's a resource issue that's well publicised, but what we really need to see from the regulator, I think, is to continue enforcing what the Act says. And we all know there's an issue with resource, and we've all got a massive bottleneck, and that's the problem that needs to be resolved. We are seeing instances where perhaps the pathway for certain projects, none of ours at the moment, but we're seeing local authority building control getting involved from an approval point of view, a registered building control approver, and it's just muddying the water a bit and fuzzying the edges. And there's some pain to be had, but we need to, I think, stay with the process and fix the resource issue rather than trying to get quick wins to circumnavigate it.
So I heard a rumour that the bar at which the BSA comes into force is going to be lowered, so that'll be more projects going through it, down to 11 metres.
Yeah.
Imagine that.
I know, and look, it goes back.
You might as well say goodbye to the property industry. It'll just be like people. There's other things people can do with their money. Like people that invest in property are entrepreneurs.
Yeah.
They're not going to do this thing because of the love of housing or commercial property. They do it because they want to make money and they want to turn their money around in a reasonable amount of time. They're just not going to do it.
Yeah.
What's the point?
How do you find this tightrope through it all? Because on the other side you've got the.
But just don't change it. It's bad enough already. Don't lower the bar.
Or heighten the bar, isn't it?
Whatever. Yeah, literally physically make it lower.
Yeah, I think it's a problem, and I do think you're seeing the reaction to that. I mean, it was only last week we saw the DII stuff being pulled back in America as everyone genuflects to Trump. So the question is, we often follow suit to the American markets and things, and so Trump's quite anti-ESG, quite anti-DII, and he's quite anti all these kind of more.
What's DII?
It's diversity and inclusion.
Yeah.
So it's sort of like trying to, would tie into the social value pieces and diversity kind of
It's
stuff.
not to do with BSA.
No, but it's to do with the
acronym.
regulatory. It's just to do with regulatory kind of process, isn't it?
Yeah, well, I think we could do with a bit of deregulation.
We become. That's it.
I'm a Trumpist. No, I'm not.
Can we clip that bit? And put
Yeah.
Do the Christmas card next year. Though.
Yeah, but the truth is we've got to find a way through it, right? And we can't have Grenfell again, and that's like, I think we all know that and don't want that, and we all probably knew that there's some stuff not going right, and this is going wrong. The question is, what will be driven through to be sensible and having voices. I mean, we've been meeting with, or going to be meeting with some government ministers and different things. And it'd be interesting to hear what they've got to say about it.
Yeah, and I think that one thing we've taken a lot of heart from in the last 2 years with the Act is the way that the technical side of our industry and the professional side has embraced it. And actually now, when we're building designs, we're not faltering through them. We're working collaboratively and proactively towards a Gateway 2 pack for submission. So, it really is the bottleneck issue that's an issue, and that's probably linked to the economy as well and not having the resource. And there's a lot of lobbying going on in various parties, from the house builders to people like the GLA, etc., all getting involved and saying, look, this needs fixing. So from a technical point of view, I do actually think we're now designing better, probably more efficiently, safer buildings. We need to deal with the administrative blocker, which probably needs some money thrown at it.
I do think bringing subcontractor information into that, or like subcontractor input into that stage 3-4 is a benefit. I think, yeah, you're right. There's problems with it, but like some of it is sensible.
Yeah, it's hugely beneficial bringing stuff early. And I think, I just want to put forward the sort of idea and see what you think that, we had this event with the City of London and they, in some ways, lead the world. And at the moment, we're in the pain point of trying to make BSA work, trying to make better sustainable regulations work. But there is an opportunity, if we see through the mess, of maybe us in the UK and London and other places setting the bar that could then be used as a template for elsewhere. And I suppose the question is, we've got to find a way that makes it work, if you know what I mean. And the problem is, it isn't really working yet. So, do we think we could make that work? And could we become an exemplar to be then applied in other countries around the world, rather than just completely deregulate, but there could be an opportunity there to create something better as an exemplar.
Yeah. And I think we are, from a technical point of view, it is already driving us that way. One of the wider impacts of the Act, I think, potentially were what weren't fully considered on the way in. Whilst we're all scratching our heads from a technical point of view, the way it's structured, and you mentioned getting sort of the subcontract design supply chain in early doors, the way we currently operate as an industry, which arguably may be slightly archaic, the way we procure projects, the preference for D&B, which is evolved and is now largely driven from potentially a funding sort of risk point of view, makes the delivery of the Act even harder. Because, we've got contractors coming under PCSAs to build a gateway or help build the Gateway 2 submission. Talking to some contractors, that's not very attractive to them. They're not making money on a PCSA. It's a way of them enabling and getting to a price and getting into
but they're getting themselves into a bidding against no one situation. So they should be loving it.
Well, they do, but I think because of the stagnation of the Gateway 2s, instead of doing one a year and, that's almost your procurement or your bidding process, they're stacking up. So the impact on that as an operating business, as a contractor, instead of having one work stream that you're just turning over and covering your overheads to release the project, you might now have 5. So it feels
loads of people in offices doing stuff and nobody on site's doing anything.
Yeah, and generating actual commercial revenue potentially.
Yeah.
So and the last bit on that is how we procure work. Like D&B, again, it's evolved into a sort of perceived risk management strategy, potentially from a funding point of view. And are we better, looking back at how we structure things from a procurement and delivery point of view, and changing that engagement to a different, or maybe a contracting model that already exists, but perhaps is not so prevalent in the industry.
Like what?
There's an argument to be said if you're taking a scheme to to stage 4, and you're doing part of stage 5 because you're bringing those subcontractors in. How much risk are you transferring by going into a D&P contract? Will we see ourselves going back down towards more of a traditional delivery route? Because
do you think traditional, or like almost construction management? You've kind of done all of the work there to be able to just construction manage it yourself.
Yeah.
I think you're going to see a hybrid, slightly new procurement. I don't see us going back to traditional.
I don't think traditional.
I don't.
is viable. But like, because there's no efficiency there, is there? You've got still like, I don't know. I think if you're you've got to do all this work up front. So how can you make that work up front pay for itself? I think it's to cut out the contractor's margin.
Yeah. Or the contractor's risk, ideally.
Yeah, exactly. The price of the risk. Yeah.
Yeah. So they don't have to price it as much risk, so you can bring the cost down.
Yeah.
Because it's the certainty in delivery. We're doing X.
Well, yeah, you can't change anything. So I suppose that would limit the amount of variations you could have.
Yeah, and it is this holistic viewpoint. So, if you hone in on that element of risk, are you buying up risk? Are you transferring risk? Oh, well, we're better off doing management contracting, which I agree with on a practical point of view. Then take that into potentially the investment market and, actually, are we better paying a small premium now to lock that risk away and lock it into a contract? Or do we want to float some risk and management contracting and maybe we'll make some buying gains, So, and that's probably, the pertinent point on the Act, that the layers of different industries and sectors that come together to deliver one real estate asset, are all affected by what the Act's doing. So there's some evolution on every front, I think.
What do you see coming this year then?
Hopefully some Gateway 2 approvals.
At the start of last year, everyone was like, just survive to 25. Now we've got to 2025. Doesn't look much better than it did at the start of last year.
Staying alive in 25.
Yeah, so stay alive through 25 has got to be the new. But I can't see 2026 looking any better. I can't see much positivity if you're in the UK property market now. Can you?
I think, look, hand on heart, I think it will be another challenging year for the industry as a whole. And a lot of that, going back to your point about deregulating and legislation, generally change. If you look at the quantum of change in our industry in the last 5 years, some of it probably accelerated by terrible events, and some of it reacting to what's happening in the world from an environmental point of view, and some of it reacting to the economy. The quantum of change has got to be the most concentrated change there has been, since we started building buildings. So, but I do think this year, we feel it's about trying to distill, what are the deliverables that can push forward? Where can we generate value as an industry? And getting on the back of, whatever we all think of the housing targets, etc., but getting on the back and seeing how we can unlock that. And we naturally see that evolving into, more collaboration, be it within a site and a mixed use type asset, or sort of wider collaboration with local authorities, driving some of the development in their borough to deliver a slightly more holistic approach.
Taking the positive spin of that, I think you mentioned before you'd been in to see the GLA, was it? And I guess we're going to start to see the MPPF new updates starting to have an impact. So this desire to build more homes, more effectively, more things, that could start to tip the balance where, if you're a site that's doing 100 units at the moment, you can get 150, then it might start to wash its face in a number of places. What were you hearing on that?
I think it's well recognised there's still a chasm of a funding gap from a grant funding point of view to plug that gap, and that's obviously very sensitive to what's going on world fiscally in terms of inflation.
I really don't think it's changed any planners. Like literally, I had a pre-up last week, and they went, "We're all very cognizant of the new legislation, but it doesn't change, the fact that this site can only accommodate X, and it can only be X tall, and it can only be X wide." And you're like, surely it does change that, but not in these planners' minds. They already, they don't think it is any different now to how it was. Like every building needs to be contextual, and I don't think a macro level change to the number of houses that are required changes the attitude that a planner would have towards what is appropriate for a site.
So we just got to take some cases to appeal.
That'll be it'll change the inspector's view. Yeah.
And I think you've hit the nail on the head. I think, and it's through a lot of these themes. It's sort of a communication, really, in that we were talking to the GLA about the practice note at a good event this week where they were talking about that and how I was saying to you earlier, prioritising, maximising the potential of sites and the capacity of sites is a potential discussion point around some of the policy constraints that perhaps we all take as completely rigid now. And Ollie, you said this, it's coming in, and that's a nice bit of guidance. Let's try and kickstart this and move it forward while we develop the wider London plan. That's got to be disseminated down and communicated and bought into by, all the parties.
I don't think the planners that were saying this were wrong, right? I think the site does the sites don't change and the context doesn't change. I think that they had a point, right? I'm not criticizing what they were saying, because I think these blunt targets don't get to the nuance. And I don't know. The massing of the site the massing that fits on the site is subjective, but it's not going to be fundamentally changed by this stuff. I want to make sure that I'm clarifying that I wasn't actually being critical of the planner's position. I don't think it's wrong.
I don't know if I fully agree with you, though. You can go up another story, you know what I mean, like on a number of sites.
Yeah, true.
And some people won't like that. Some people will think it's great. It just depends on I literally sat in a members briefing about a month ago, and you had one side going, this should be way taller, and the other side going, it's far too tall. So you're always going to get that. Yeah. So I guess it's
classic DRP.
It wasn't a DRP, it was a members.
Really?
Yeah.
And then that probably relates back to the point of distilling down to let's get some key deliverables we can all relate to, and give ourselves the flexibility behind that to find solutions to get there. And there's going to probably be more discussion around it. But unless, across all the work streams, we try and distill down what are the actual deliverables across all the requirements of this building we're going to build, and then let's find a solution to get there, because the technical expertise is there in the industry. You've almost got to let the shackles off a bit, but just have that gateway that we need to get through that gives us those deliverables.
Yeah.
Brilliant. I think we should wrap it up there. Andy, thank you very much for your time. It's been fantastic. And looking forward to our ESG white paper coming out soon.
Lovely.
Well,
Thank you,
probably
Jack.
not soon.
Thank you, Andy.
Thanks.
If you enjoyed this conversation and want another great podcast about real estate, investment management and development, then check out the People Property Place podcast, where Matthew Watts, founder of Rockborn, speaks to the movers, shakers, innovators and leaders in the real estate industry.